See? That's why I have you. Welcome, everybody. I was just literally going through my disclosure of bear with me while I work out the kinks of all of this. I'm trying to juggle doing a live stream on my own here and with the Pro Tools and broadcasting software and YouTube chat and all that fun stuff. It can be a little bit much. So anyways, you guys didn't miss anything. I was basically saying all of the things that I needed to say so that you'd cut me some slack when the mic didn't work for the first minute. So anyways, I've wanted to do a live stream for a long time. And I think with a lot of people doing content, public content, and I will say this is the case for me, it's scary, man. It can be scary putting yourself out there. It can be overwhelming to go through the work of doing this and putting it all together and planning it. And maybe nobody watches, maybe nobody listens, maybe nobody cares. It's a scary thing. So it took me a while to kind of get over that. And here we are. So like I said, bear with me, still figuring this out. I think over the next, my goal is to do a live stream at least once every few weeks between now and the end of the year, and then hopefully get on probably a more frequent schedule. But definitely let me know, reach out in the DMs, subscribe to the YouTube channel. Even go to my website and you've got my my web email there. If you guys have stuff that you want to learn about, if there's things that you like, things that you don't like, just let me know. I'm an open book here. And so here we go. So I know a lot of you have reached out already through my Instagram posts that you did see my Nail the Mix on URM. And that I basically kind of deconstructed the San Quentin mix that was on the last Nickelback album. And obviously in that format, most people kind of want the good, juicy details of all the real specifics. And it's interesting how many comments I got and how many DMs I got after the fact, really interested in my philosophy and my process for setting up a mix template, setting up my session, why I organize the things the way that I do. And I thought this would be a really great option to literally build I don't want to say a mix template, but let's build a session from scratch together to where I can show you everything that I do when I'm building a session template and give you some insight as to why I'm making the decisions I'm making. So let's do this. I'm literally going to start from scratch and I'm going to talk you through setting up a session the way that I would set up a session if I didn't have a mix template, if I'm doing this for the first time. And to be honest with you, I probably do this maybe once every 6 months to almost just make myself rethink some of the conclusions that I've come to before. So give me 1 second. I'm getting a little bit of a loop here on my other computer. Everybody, the sound's okay, video's okay, everybody's hearing and seeing everything okay? All right. Let's do this. Okay, so I'm obviously working in Pro Tools. I'm going to switch views here. Stand by. That's the one I want. Thank you. Okay. I'm using Pro Tools. Okay. If you're using something else, it's okay. The big thing with me is philosophy. Okay, so it's not necessarily just what I do; it's why I do it. And there's a lot of thought that goes into why I do things the way that I do. And it's not just like, oh, I'm sitting down right now to make a session. I'm going to think about it. I'm always thinking about this shit. I'm always thinking about, is there a way to do things better? Is there a way to set up my session to avoid certain scenarios that I find to be creative blocks or technical blocks? Or is there a way to do something faster? Everything's got a reason because I'm always contemplating and nothing's just kind of willy-nilly. So regardless of what you use, you can still go through this decision-making process as well on your own with whatever DAW you use, okay? But some of this stuff that I'm going to be showing you, unfortunately, is specific to Pro Tools. I use Pro Tools. If you use Logic Studio One, Live, whatever you're using, you can apply the same philosophy and the same concepts, which is ultimately what I really want to teach. So we're just going to start at the beginning. Here we go. And like I said, I will kind of pause every once in a while regarding Q&A. So just kind of hold tight, or put it in there, put it in the chat. But by all means, when I come back to that, I will, I'll look in the chat. So, and eventually I'll figure out the whole chat thing and maybe get a moderator to help me out with this, but we got to start somewhere, right? So here we go. Okay. Something as simple as making a new session. You know how much thought I've put into this. Name, first thing. This is going to be crazy. Some of you are going to be like, why am I watching this? But you know what? Maybe it'll give you some insight. I'm strategic with what I name a session, okay? So if I'm working on a brand new song, we don't know what the name of the song is. We don't know what anything is. There's no lyrics, there's no song, whatever. So I will at least name it something that gives me some indication of what the song is. So for today, we're doing a live stream. Okay, so I'm going to put live stream. We'll do setup, live stream setup, or you know what? Let's call this a template. We'll make this a template. Live stream template, and the other thing I'll put is the date, and I'll put the date like that. Okay, and then if there is, let's say there is a song idea. This has helped a lot of my clients. It's helped me a lot. A lot of my clients will have ideas. They'll play a guitar riff at the back of the room, or they'll send me a voice memo or something like that. And they'll say, okay, next time we're in the studio, let's record this, or I want to work on this song. Let's start a new session. I usually have like a metronome tap on my phone that I'll tap out the tempo, and then I will name the session. So for instance, let's say somebody was playing a guitar riff and I tapped it out to 96 BPM. And let's say the song kind of sounded like, I don't know, pick something that it reminds you of or makes you feel a certain way. Like, you know, Dark Cloud. I would literally name the song 98 Dark Cloud. 98's BPM, Dark Cloud, and then I would probably put the date. And that way, if you don't get anywhere on the song and you come back a month later or a year later in some of the cases for me, and you're like, hey, remember that thing I played? And you're like, no. Well, you remember the name of it? And you're like, no. And somebody starts playing it and you're like, oh, that kind of made me feel like a dark cloud. Oh shit, I probably named it something like that. Or was that last year? What was the date on your phone with the voice memo? Oh, is that date? Okay, cool. I can go and look at the song titles. Or even as something as simple as the BPM. If somebody's playing it and you're like, oh shit, what was that song? Just play it. What was that? What do we call that song? What was that starting point? You tap it out and you're like 98 BPM. Perfect. So I'm going to call this live stream template 9/29/23. Holy shit, September's almost over. Okay. In Pro Tools, obviously, you've got your session file type, bit depth, sample rate, IO setting, all this stuff down here. For me, I always suggest going the highest bit depth possible. There's no reason at this point not to. Storage is cheap, and even if you're short on storage, this will force you to clean up your sessions better and get rid of files you don't need, so that way you can make room. Always go the highest bit, the highest bit depth. Sample rate, this is a big question I get from a lot of people. I work at 48. Why do I work at 48? When I started mixing in the box, I did a lot of A/B testing as to what not only the session sounded best at, but what the plugin sounded best at. And I would do a mix, and then I would convert that to 48 and 88.2 and 96 and 44.1, and then I'd print mixes, and then I listened to them, and I determined that 48 for me worked the best because the plugins seemed to sound just a little bit better, but it's not so crazy that your system's bogging down. The other thing I will say, if you can't hear the difference or if you don't have a preference, work at whatever sample rate the majority of the people you are working with are working. If all of my clients worked at 44.1, I would work at 44.1. Honestly, like the difference isn't that big. So honestly, just do whatever's going to work best for you. Okay. Sorry, I keep checking the YouTube stream just to make sure it's still live here. Okay. So I'm going to select 48. The IO setup. I'm going to start with the stereo mix, which is kind of like the default setting here. And there's a reason why I want to show you how I build out my IO, because obviously there's some, the IO in Pro Tools is kind of a shitstorm, but we'll get through it. So anyways, I've been starting to use interleaf files. I feel like they're just easier to deal with. If somebody's like, hey, send me that track of the keyboard, of the piano, they just want the audio file. I don't have to send them two. I can left and right. I can just interleave. I've just done that for now. It just makes it a little easier. And then let's create this. Okay. I'm just going to put it on my desktop for now. And We are off. Here we go. Okay. Is everybody following along so far? I know this is like super basic shit, but the reason why I'm talking through it is I want you to know that there's a reason for every single thing I'm doing. And I've thought about it, and I've weighed the pros and the cons. It's not like, oh, what am I going to use today? Oh, what am I going to name this thing? Song 5. It's like, that doesn't make any fucking sense. So here we go. Okay. So the first thing that I urge every single one of you to do, and I'm not going to actually do this in real time, but I urge every one of you, whatever DAW that you're working in, go through the manual. Read the fucking manual, RTFM. Read the manual, find out what every single one of these preferences does, because there's going to be something in there that you're going to be like, oh shit, man, that saves me like 4 mouse clicks, or that saves me like 5 steps, or that makes the window do what I want it to do. It just makes the whole process a lot smoother for you. And if you haven't figured out what this is, then unfortunately, you're not going to be able to utilize this. So this is another thing I do. Pro Tools updates every 3-4 months now. This is something I do every, I don't know, probably 6 months. I will literally go back to the manual. I'll spend an hour and go through every preference in here and make sure it's optimized for my workflow. I don't want you copying down what I have here. This is irrelevant for you. I've set this all up for me, what works best for me. We're going to get to how you make those decisions, but I've gone through and optimized my preferences. You need to do the same. Same with in Pro Tools, all of these menus here, the options, like what do all of these things do? You need to know what those things do, because there's going to be one button in there that's going to save you, I don't know, 10 minutes every time you're working on a session. And if you work on a session every night, that's going to save you 10 minutes a night, which is going to save you an hour at the end of the week, which is going to save you 4 hours at the end of the month. Like, do the math, right? So you got to know what every one of these things does. All right. Awesome. Okay. Let's go to the IO here. I absolutely cannot stand working in a session that has like default IO labels. I cannot stand it. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually, instead of rebuilding an IO setup from scratch, I'm actually just going to quickly kind of erase this and then import mine. A Studio :1 2. Okay. Yeah, maybe that's 1 2. Let me show you something. What does that look like? Look what that looks like in this. Like, you can't even see it here. And I'm sure you probably can't zoom in enough. But right now, the IO in Pro Tools says AS :1 2. That is so not helpful. Is that 12? Is it, what is AS? It's so not helpful. So let's do ourselves a favor. Instead of having to blow that track up every time we need to look at it, even here, even in the mix, A Studio :1 2, it's so cluttered, you can't even really tell what it is. So we're going to go and just make that something as simple as 1 2. Done, right? So I just want to get out of that. I just want to show you what that looks like now. Oh, I got to change it in the bus setup. Hang on one second. So let's just change it here. Hopefully you guys can see this. I know it's going to be small on your screen, but that's the point, right? If you can see it on the YouTube video, it's going to be even easier to see when you're working in full resolution on your screen, right? So now it says 1 2. Like, it's so much easier to look at, right? And I know it seems nitpicky, but all these little things are taking up like subconscious brain power. Every time you look at a label of a track output or input, if your brain has to then like decode what it is and has to decipher like what it might be routed to, that's pulling you out of the creative mode, and that's not what you want. We want to set you up, so get rid of all of the technical barriers so that way you can be creative and you can be focusing on the stuff that really matters, not having to think about what AS Studio :1 2 means. Like, that's not helpful. So I'm going to show you what my IO setup looks like, okay? Delete. Okay, so I'm just going to do this one at a time here. So I'm going to go here. Here's another thing I do. I date my IO setups. So that way you know which is the one that you used. And if you know, if you did a mix, let's say 4 months ago, and it was a certain date, and you can kind of find a way to get back to where you were if you have to re-import an IO setup. So I've got my IO setup. The last time I'm not using this default or the Baseford Mix one. That's something else. But the last time I made my kind of studio IO setup was April 8th, 23. So I'm going to use that one. Look how much cleaner that is, right? When I'm in the session, it's so clean. I don't have to think about what it is. It shows up on the screen. It shows up on my control surfaces. It's easy to look at. Everything's great, okay? So you might want to go in and name that, like for clients who I have stuff just always hooked up, like, you know, channel 1 is always a microphone. Channel 2 is always the guitar DI. I'll go in and name these specifics. So that might be better for you. However is going to work best for you. My brain works this way because I came from the days of a Pro Tools was like a virtual tape machine where, you know, 1 and 2 it was whatever you had plugged into the patch base, and that could change on a day-to-day basis. So, okay, so again, this is ugly. Let's get rid of that. We're going to import my IO setup here. Okay, again, looks a lot nicer. I mean, I won't dig into the details of my setup right now, but basically, I've got 2 interfaces. One of them is kind of for all my regular IO stuff, and the other one I've got a summing amp, a 16-channel summing amp, and then I've also got a digital input-output for a converter. So anyways, this just looks a lot nicer. You'll see it's a lot easier to look at. Okay, here's where I really forget this. I'm just going to do the inserts real quickly. This is probably irrelevant for most of you. I use a few hardware inserts. So here is where I really want everybody to think about what's going to work best for them, okay? I want to show you guys something in Pro Tools that I really don't like, but we're going to do it anyways. On the bus sends, okay? And I hope you all know what bus sends are. Sends, I mean, I call them bus sends, but sends. So sends are a way that you can just route signal around. And I'm not going to get into super detailed stuff on kind of the basic stuff. I think you probably already all know that. But this menu, bus 1 to 24, okay? If you go back to the IO setup, and we're just going to hit default on this page, boom, okay? That brings in all of my output assignments, assigns them to the actual hardware. It brings bus 1 through 24 is kind of your default, right? So if I've got a bus 1 and 2, and I get a session from somebody, and I've got a bunch of stuff routed to 1 and 2, and then I get a session from somebody else who they also have stuff routed to 1 and 2, it's going to do one of 2 things. It's either going to make a duplicate 1-2 bus, which I'm sure a lot of you have seen, and then you have to go through and now your IO setup's an absolute mess. Or in some scenarios, it's actually going to merge them. And if it merges them, then you're in trouble because you're going to have stuff routed where you don't want it to be routed. Now, the other problem is if, let's say, you run through bus 1 to 24 and you need more buses. I'm going to add just a ton more here, okay? Let's add 64. Actually, let's do 48 stereo buses. We're going to add the auto create subpath, right? Okay. So now I'm down to 120. We'll leave it for that for now, okay? Now when you're going to use your sends, look at this menu. So if I want to send something to send 97, like you're waiting and waiting and waiting and waiting, right? So here's the problem. I never want to put my custom sends here because if somebody sends me a bus 1 and 2, it's just going to make things kind of get all out of order. But I also don't want to have to put my custom bus sends, and I'll tell you what the custom bus sends are. I don't want to have to put those at the end of the menu because I don't want to have to scroll through that menu the entire time to get down to the bottom. Well, here's a little Pro Tools trick that some of you may or may not know. Pro Tools, the track has 2 bus menus, but it will only show you the second bus menu when you have exceeded the capacity of the first one. And the first one, I think, gives you 64 stereo or 128 mono buses. So here's what we're going to do. See how that's going to bus 127, 128? That's the very last one. Okay, check this out. Okay, so now my bus, if I want to go to the very last bus, or if I want to make a custom bus for my effect sends, let's say, I got to go all the way to the bottom or rearrange them, but I'm still dealing with a menu that's large, okay? This is a pain in the butt to work with. Here's a little trick. If you create your I/O setup, do all of your buses, but make just generic buses from 1.2 all the way to 127.28, and then start creating your own custom buses after the fact. So here, I'll show you what I mean. So let's just, I'm going to just give you an example here. So let's call this drums bus, okay? That's going to be like my subgroup for all my drums, right? Okay. We'll call this my percussion bus. We'll call this my bass bus. By the way, I'm hitting tab on the keyboard to get to the next bus here. Okay, guitars A. I'll give you a rundown as to why I name things the way I name them as we move on. Keys. Let me put bus here. I always like to label exactly what stuff is. Okay, and we'll do lead V bus, and we'll do BGV bus. Okay, watch this. Okay, so now you're probably thinking, if I want to route something to those buses, I'm going to have to go pull that menu down and go all the way to the bottom. And that's going to be a pain in the ass. But watch what happens when you get past 128. You get a second bus menu. And now this second menu is only your custom buses. Okay? How awesome is that? Okay, here's another thing. This is just insight into my madness, I guess. Even the look of this, I don't like. Okay? Drum bus. It's a stereo return, stereo send. When am I ever going to only be sending to the left or the right where I couldn't use a pan knob, where I'd only want to set the output to the left or the right? There's not a scenario. So I never want to look at those. I don't want to look at the mono options, what they call the subpaths. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to get rid of them, okay? I'm just going to absolutely clean this up, okay? And when you're making new buses, you can deselect for it to auto-create these. But check this out. Okay? Look how clean that is. Boom, 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 boom. Way better, okay? Any questions on any of this so far? Like I said, I got a little bit of a delay, so we'll have to see how quickly I get responses from you guys. But if you have questions regarding any of the I/O stuff or any of kind of the concepts behind why I'm setting stuff up, just throw them in the chat and I'll see them. If not, I will keep moving. So I'm going to go back to the I/O setup, and I'm actually just going to get rid of this entire I/O setup, and I'm just going to start from my own template. And I'll show you kind of what I put in it. Okay. Excellent. Glad it's useful. Love that. All right. Okay. So again, once you have this set up once, my I/O setup is always changing, but not that much, right? I might change. I might add a bus. I might come up with a different workflow. Like I said, I'm always thinking about how to make things better, how to improve things, how to save time, how to save mouse clicks. Like I literally think about mouse clicks. If there's something that usually takes 10 mouse clicks or 6 mouse clicks and I can get it down to 2, man, that's a win. I live on a computer, so if I can save 200 mouse clicks in a day, it's usually more like, if you added up all of these little tricks, it's usually, man, it's probably 1,000 mouse clicks a day. Again, do the math. Over the course of a week, over the course of a month, over the course of a year, I've been mixing in the box for, I think it's coming up to 15 years. So times all those mouse clicks I've saved by 15 years, and I've probably given myself like another 5 years of no carpal tunnel. So I know it's not a very nice joke. I know people who have got it, and it's debilitating. It sucks, but that's one of the reasons why you want to figure this stuff out. So, okay, here is my I/O setup. Okay, and again, I've named my bus main out, mix out, ref out, headphone out on my monitor mixer on my monitor controller, which basically just comes straight off my converters. I have a button that will let me monitor output 1 and 2, 3 and 4, 5 and 6, and 7 and 8. Okay, 1 and 2 is going to let me monitor basically whatever's coming out of my mix bus, like my main mix. Okay, my main out. 3 and 4 I assign to what I call my mix out, and when I get to this, I'll show you. I route my mix bus to a mix print track. That's what that monitors. 5 and 6 is a reference output. So I have a track that's a reference track. And that could be a demo or rough mix. It could be a song I mixed. It could be a song that I think sounds awesome that somebody else mixed. It could be a song that somebody sent with the session saying, hey, I really like the way the snare drum sounds in this. Kind of wanted to get in that ballpark. Whatever that is, that's a ref mix. And I've also got a separate headphone amp that I sometimes use the headphone correction. It's not SonarWorks anymore, but you guys know what it is. So I have those options of switching between hearing a bunch of different stuff. So that's what that is. And again, instead of just having them labeled 1 and 2, 3 and 4, 5, 6, 7 and 8, in this scenario, I want them to tell me, in Pro Tools, I want it to show me and tell me right away what I want what on the corresponding button on my monitor controller I want to use. So, sorry, that was a little long-winded. Anyways, here's buses 1 and 2, generic, and they're also placeholders because most people don't work like this. Here's the problem. I'm telling you all about this, and now you guys are going to send me sessions, or I'm going to get sessions from other people, and they're going to have custom buses living in my second menu, and then I'm going to have to go and clean this shit up all over again. So it was good while it lasted, while it was a secret, but here we are. Somebody in the chat asked, does getting a MIDI controller save a lot of mouse clicks? Absolutely, and you guys can't see it right now, but my desk is... you know what I'll do? I'll take a picture of my desk and I'll put it on Instagram. I've got an Avid S3, which is a 16-channel control surface with knobs and buttons. I've got an Avid dock, which is more buttons and more knobs. I've got an iPad with the Avid Control app. I've got a Stream Deck with 24 custom macros. I've got a rock solid audio SSL strip type plugin controller. And I've got macros for days, either programmed into the Stream Deck or even just keys that you hold down. So yes, anything that you can do to save mouse clicks. Controllers, macros, quick keys, anything you can think of. Even if you're using your iPhone, you can set up SoundFlow on your iPhone. So you can just set your iPhone next to your keyboard, and while you're working in Pro Tools or whatever else, you can hit buttons that will do 55 things in one button press. So yes, absolutely. I use controllers, love them. Can't say enough about them. Just figure out a way to integrate them in your workflow. You got to make sure, here's the big thing about controllers. Don't get them if they're going to slow you down. You got to invest the time to learn it and for it to become second nature. I have a bad habit of this. I'll get in habits of not using my controllers, and then it kind of feels like it's harder to use the controllers because I'm out of habit. So yes, somebody just said Stream Deck is super useful. Stream Deck, SoundFlow, I'm not endorsed by either of them, although if they want to give me free stuff, I'm always available for freebies. Just kidding, not really. I can't recommend them enough. I think SoundFlow, for anybody who's serious about working in a DAW, SoundFlow, Stream Deck. I mean, Stream Decks are great, but SoundFlow can use a bunch of different controllers or even just quick keys. It's a must. Absolutely a must. So if you don't have it, you haven't played with it, get it, please. All right, so let's get back to the I/O setup. We got our custom buses starting after 128. I've got mix bus A, B, C, mix bus stereo, mix print. I've got effects stereo 1. I've got effects 2, 3, 4, which are mono. And you can see whether or not they're mono or stereo. And you can also see if there's what do they call them? Subpaths? I think they call them subpaths. You can also tell if there's subpaths with this little arrow. Like I said, anything for me that's in stereo that I never really, like I don't want a mono subpath, I get rid of so it just doesn't show up in the menu. It just cleans up the menu. So I got all my effects sends. I've got my buses. So I've got drums, percussion, bass, guitars. I call them guitars A, guitars B. I'll talk a little bit about why I have them set up that way. Lead vocal bus, BG bus, kick bus, snare bus, tom bus, cymbals bus, rooms bus, comp, drums comp, percussion comp. I've got a parallel comp track to every single one of those buses. Kick key, snare key, vocal key, 4 generic keys. And then I've got this placeholder here, just so when I do pull up the menu, I've got a placeholder to get to the bottom really quickly. And then I've got a couple buses that I use for remote sessions. So there's a lot here to unpack, and I know I'm blowing through this. So if anybody's got any questions specifically about this, please pop them in now. I don't want to move too far past this if people have questions, because this is something that confuses a lot of people. But I'm hoping once we start building out the session, you'll understand why I do these. And again, don't screenshot this. Your IO setup should not look like mine. You don't have my experience, not that I have more or less experience than you, but my experience is different than your experience. I started working at the tail end of like the analog era, where I learned on big, large format consoles and outboard gear and, 5,000 point patch bays, and Pro Tools was kind of like 16 channels and had to sync up with a tape machine or a DA88 or something like that. Like, I've got a lot of scar tissue, and I call it scar tissue. I've got a lot of habits that are from that era. If you don't have that experience, like, you shouldn't have the same workflow as me, all right? So don't just copy what I'm doing, but try to follow with me so that you understand why I came to these conclusions. Ask yourself the same questions. Is there a way that you can name your buses so that they explain what they are better, so that they fit in the track, even when the track's down or minimized? A big thing for me, and I will mention this a couple times, when I first started mixing in the box, Avid had I think it was DigiDesign at the time, maybe it was Avid, doesn't matter. They had a control surface called the icon, and the little scribble strips on the icon were not great, and they would really compact the track name or any of the parameters that were showing up in it. I think there were only like 10 characters. And if your track name or even your output label exceeded 10 characters, it would start dropping characters. But it determined, based off of probably logic that had been kind of figured out, it determined which letters to drop. Well, if you know it's going to drop letters because the name is so long, why not you abbreviate it into something that will fit, that doesn't need to be abbreviated by Pro Tools, and you get to determine which letters it gets dropped, right? So for instance, guitars. Instead of me typing out GUITARS and then somebody figuring out or me minimizing it, a track that says guitar, that's labeled with a guitar's input, and now on my control surface or on Pro Tools, it's mangled that name into something smaller. I'll just abbreviate it myself, and now I know that this is going to fit, and I've abbreviated it the way that I want to see it. So that way it doesn't pull me out of that. Somebody asked in the chat, do you think Studio One Professional DAW is less efficient than Pro Tools? To be honest with you, I know a few people who have switched to Studio One that have been on Pro Tools for years and absolutely love it. I've spent so many hours on Pro Tools. I equate to using a different DAW to asking a guitar player who has been studying classical guitar for 20 years to start playing left-handed. Be like, yeah, play the other way. And I'm like, I'm sure they could do it. I'm sure they could figure it out really fast. But it's like, you're going to be wasting a lot of muscle memory and a lot of the work that you've built up to that point. So if I was starting from scratch, what I would do is I would probably spend, I don't know, maybe a month or two trying out each DAW and figuring out what works best for me. So anyways, won't get too far into that, but everybody's got to find something that works best. I know a lot of guys who use Cubase. I know a ton of guys who use Logic. It's interesting. Different camps, kind of different. I don't want to say, everybody used to say genres of music, or like people would be like, oh, songwriters use Logic and producers, engineers use Pro Tools. And it's like, yeah, maybe. Then it was like pop guys use Studio One, and rock guys use, Cubase. And yeah, maybe there's some truth to that. It doesn't really matter. Somebody else asked what mix ABC are and why. I will get to that actually. But basically the quick answer is it gives me multiple mix buses. So again, this is left over from old school days. My favorite console is an SSL 4000. There was an SSL 4000 EG, G plus, whatever. There was also a 6000. The 6000 was very similar to the 4000, except it had two extra mix buses. It had an A, B, and C bus. And what a lot of guys would do is that's I don't want to say that's how parallel compression started, but it would allow you to route, let's say, the drum kit to it allowed you, let's say, to do all the drums to bus A, and then all like the guitars to bus B and everything else to bus C. But you could also then put the drums into bus C as well, and then squash the crap out of bus A. So bus A is almost like a parallel drum compressor. And so for a while I was, with the A, B, and C, for a while I was using the A, B, and C bus kind of like the SSL 6000, where I would route typically like my drums and percussion to A, my bass and guitars and keys to B, my vocals and effects to C. And that way it would just give me another level of processing. So if I'm like, yeah, the drums are good, I just need to like compress them a little bit, but everything else sounds good, I could do that, and gave me some flexibility with that. When I'm using my summing amp, it's not as easy. It's not, well, I don't want to say not as easy. I don't know if it's not even really possible, because the way that I'm using my summing amp. So I bounce back and forth between the two scenarios. Sometimes I'll go to a summing amp and then come back in on a stereo mix bus. Other times I'll use the ABC bus, and then that collapses down into a stereo mix bus. But you're getting ahead of me, and I like it though. I like it. Again, use whatever works for you. Okay, I think we've tackled the I/O. Let's start making tracks. Okay, I want to show everybody another kind of another power user trick. Okay, I know a lot of people who are setting up a session and they'll say, okay, well, I know I'm always going to have a drum kit. I know I'm going to have a bass and, DI and an amp. Okay, so I'm just going to start building this out. So I'm going to create 24 tracks. And then I'm going to do, kick, I'm going to show you some of the stuff that not to do. Okay. K in D112. Okay. Let's go to the next track. Kick. I'm going to make it even worse. Kick drum outside. Fat 47. Terrible track name. Snare top SM57. Okay, you get the point, right? Okay, first of all, I don't know if you guys can see this over here. Hopefully you can. KCKD112. Yes, I know exactly what that is. I know what it is because it's my session. I made the track. I made the name. If I sent you a session, or if you had a client send you a session and that's what the track name looked like, you'd probably have to blow that up to look at what it is. Even worse, if you kept it that way, depending on what your control surface is, depending on what your track resolution is, depending on if you're in narrow mix views or not, somebody says the track names are starting to look like Wi-Fi passwords. That's a fucking great Wi-Fi password. The next Wi-Fi network I set up, if anybody finds out where I live and gets in my neighborhood, you're going to be able to connect to my Wi-Fi. I'm going to name it Kick Drum Outside FET 47. I'm going to do it. I love that. That's hilarious. Thank you for that. Yes, these I'm going to show you examples of 2 sessions that I've gotten recently. Once we get through a little bit, I'm going to open 2 sessions. sessions I've been hired to mix. One of them is kind of like pretty good. One of them I've gone through and cleaned up and made really good. And then the one is kind of a disaster. But anyways, we'll get to that. Like I said, a lot of people are going to go through and they're going to guess, how, what tracks do I usually get? Let's just make all these, generic drum tracks and guitar tracks and all this stuff. And then when it comes time when we get to the next step, when I say, okay, now let's go through and I'm going to explain to you why I always have my sends all set up. Well, then we're going to have to go through and we're going to have to put the sends on every track, right? And we'll go and do, our sends. I hate that one. I'm going to show you a trick. Delete everything. We're going to make 2 tracks. We're just going to call these like our master template tracks, okay? We're going to make 1 mono and we're going to make 1 stereo, okay? Just to get started. Now, this template is a little bit more for mix purposes, okay? So, but the same stuff applies. Somebody says, what headphones can you recommend mixing? Can you recommend under $500? Completely off topic, but I will answer it because I'm here. I've got the Sennheiser HD 650s and the 600s I used to have until they crapped out on me. For mixing, I like open ear headphones. So I'd say whatever open ones. The 650, the Sennheiser 650s were, in my opinion, the most neutral I could find. And I love these. They're comfortable. I can wear them all day. They sound good. Not a lot of bass, so you got to always check on something else. But anyways, quick question. Quick digression there to get that question. Thank you for that question, though. Okay, back to the tracks. I make a mono track and a stereo track. Why do I do one of each? Well, Pro Tools, unfortunately, and I hope they eventually fix this. If you've got a stereo track with a plugin on it, and then you split that track, and it wasn't a multi-mono plugin, it sometimes loses. It just removes the plugin altogether. It doesn't really you can't really convert seamlessly mono tracks to stereo tracks and stereo tracks to mono tracks. So, for instance, again, I like using stereo tracks whenever I can. And that might be for another video. Maybe I might do a whole live stream on using stereo tracks. I use stereo tracks for things that aren't even stereo. Because they have pan knobs for each side. So you can still, you don't have to keep them left and right. You can pan them wherever you want. It's a 2-channel track. And you can do whatever you want with it. Anyways, I'm going to set up a mono and a stereo track, okay? And here's the other thing. I like using symbols. So instead of typing mono and stereo, although you could do that, and I'm using a capital, so it's going to make it look different than maybe my other tracks because I use lowercase a lot. But I also like to use symbols. So I'm just going to use a bullet for the mono, and I'll use 2 bullets for the stereo, okay? And here's what we're going to do. We're going to go and set up my effects sends, okay? And a lot of people have asked me about this. This is, again, scar tissue from the SSL 4,000 days. The SSL had a limited amount of sends and returns, and it was almost like too limiting, but it helps because you couldn't, you had to have like 3 reverbs and that's it, and like 4 delays, and it kept you kind of limited to where when you wanted reverb on something, it wasn't a big decision. You only had a couple of reverb sends, and when you would work on a console, you'd typically set up those reverb sends ahead of time to a reverb unit, and you had something kind of programmed in. So you had limited options. So I still like to keep my options limited specifically for that. So here we go. I'm just going to set this up like I set up a console. So on the console, they had a stereo send. Okay. They had 3 mono sends. So effects ST1, which effects stereo 1. Effects 2, I don't put the ST there because this is mono. And again, use whatever labels make sense to you. These make sense to me because that's kind of how they were. I stared at them on a board, and I saw. I mean, I assisted a lot of amazing engineers. Every guy had his own way of doing it. Some guys, they didn't want the reverb unit written on the console tape, because if they change the reverb unit, then they're like, well, that doesn't make sense anymore. Now it's not the Lexicon 480, it's the AMS. So they would just put verb 1, and they knew verb 1 was the thing that they plugged in at the beginning of the day, or that they always had there. Some guys want exactly what it is. Some guys want like Lexicon 480 plate. So if you want FX Stereo 1 to be drum room, label it that. If it's always drum room, or if that makes it easier for you, but just give it some thought as to what's going to be number 1, descriptive enough. Number 2, work for every session. You shouldn't be changing these labels for every session. I mean, you can, but for the most part, you want to keep them pretty consistent. And number 3, what do you want to look at? What's going to be easy to look at and not distracting to look at? Somebody mentioned the Wi-Fi passwords of the track names. It's so distracting to work in those sessions. They just make me feel like tense. So don't live with that. Like, make it better. Okay. So the other thing, the SSL. So I've got 1 stereo, 3 mono. That's a little bit limiting for me. The thing that the SSL that I worked on the most, which ended up at Tommy Lee's studio, and I think it's either for sale or he might have just sold that board, but it had a mod on it where all the channels left of the center section would send to their own batch of sends, and the right side would send to its own batch of sends. So I've kind of recreated that with my effect sends as well. So I'm going to do on the bottom chunk here, I'm going to skip over the top, and I'm going to leave that one empty. And this is going to be kind of my left and right side of the console, I guess. Again, this if you've never worked on a console, like this probably doesn't even make sense for you to copy. But again, I'm going to be a broken record. The reason I do this is because it gets out of the way of my workflow. I know these are there. I know where they're sending. I know how to find them. My muscle memory is so built up on this, to where if somebody was really quickly, hey, can you put a reverb on my vocal? Like, I don't have to think about anything. It's literally turning one button on. I actually just turned that off. Okay, here, this brings me to my next. I'm going to give you just like really, really like baseline commentary here, because I see people doing certain things in Pro Tools, and I'm watching them do it. I'm like, oh God, this is painful to watch you. Okay, I just created these sends, right? I don't have to. I hate these menus. I fucking hate these menus. Pick it, over, down. Oh, I fucking hate them. A lot of my workflow revolves around never having to go into like these drop down menu bullshit. If I can avoid those, I will. So I've already set this up once. I don't need to set it up again. I don't need to go through this selection process again. Copy them. If you hold Option, click and drag. Wow, look at that. Boom. Right? Does that make sense? Like that just saved me time and headache. And you pick the drop down menu, and you're like, oh shit, I'm going over there. How many times have you gone and tried to do one of these, and then you pick it and you accidentally go outside the window, and then the window disappears? It's like, oh, what a disaster. Just avoid that if you can. Okay. So now I've got a mono track, I've got a stereo track, I've got all of my effect sends set up. Here's the next trick. On the console, it's amazing. It's kind of funny how archaic my template is, and how it's based on an archaic workflow. Yet when I show people some of these tricks, they're like, oh man, that makes so much sense. It's almost like the limitations of a console kind of force them to get it right. Okay, so here we go. Holy moly, an hour's gone by already. Are you guys falling asleep on me, or is this good? Oh, what did somebody say? I have to practice about insert send is not the same display on mine, but I got about it. Okay, I think that they're saying, yeah, it's different on theirs, but they kind of get the idea. On the console, you've got your effect sends, and they're basically push button knobs. Some consoles had buttons where you'd push the send in, and then you'd have the knob, right? Okay. On-off button, let's call that. Okay. So in Pro Tools, how you turn a send off and on, right, is either pulling the window up and muting it, or a quick key. If you hit Command, I'm obviously on a Mac, so please do the whatever the conversion is for Windows. I haven't used a Windows machine in forever, but Command, click, right? That bypasses it, okay? So that could be your on and off button, right? So start with them all bypassed. That could be your off and on button, right? So you have all your tracks and you've got all your sends set up and you're like, oh, let's go back to the vocalist. Can I get some reverb on my vocal? Okay, well, I know I got a reverb on FX Stereo 5. That's kind of my vocal verb. And I go and I press Command and I turn that on and be like, there you go, cool, right? That was one button press to turn it on, okay? Great, that was awesome. Most people, what I see is they don't have anything set up. And so let's do that same exercise. Vocalist says, hey, can I get a reverb on my vocal? And they'll say, sure. And then you'll select a bus and you'll be like, oh, where was my reverb again? Was it bus 19 or 21 or 20? Oh man, where was it again? And then you have to go out and you have to look at your return. You probably don't have a return set up, right? Long story short, like it's already taken way too long, okay? So here we're going to make this even better. All right, so you got bypass. Command, on, off, right? Can I get some reverb? Done, on. We're going to make this one better, okay? I'm going to turn these all back on, out of bypass. Every send that's on eats up a little bit of processing power, okay? Now, again, with the new computers, probably not a big deal, but there's another benefit. Like I said, I think of all the angles. I'm crazy. I'm literally like obsessed with like just workflows, but whatever. Even if it didn't eat up processing power, I'm going to take this one step further. I'm actually going to deactivate this send, okay? If you right click on it, you can make the send inactive. The quick key for that is Control Command click. Okay, see how it kind of grays it out? Okay, so now I've just turned all of those things are off. Let's go through the same exercise. Vocalist says, hey, can I get some reverb on my vocal? Command Control, one click, vocals got reverb, right? If I had a return set up. We'll get to that next. But that's one mouse click. I just added an extra button press, but it was one click, right? So you say, nah, you know what? I'll leave it. I'll just, my computer's really powerful. I'll just leave them all in bypass. Okay, well, here's another reason why this inactive works better than bypass. Okay? I'm going to show you something here. Okay? The first track is my way of doing it. This track, let's say, is the person who just like, forget the make it inactive. I'm just going to leave it in bypass. And when I need it, I'll turn it on, right? Okay. So here's what I'm going to do. I'll bypass that one. Somebody says, you can tell if there's automation. Correct. And I don't know if that's been something that people have come across before, but it certainly is for me. My whole purpose for doing this is if the send is inactive, I know for certain, 100%, it's not being used. Not being used. If I see a track that looks like this, it's one send on and 7 sends in bypass, I can't tell without having to go look at the track and go look in the automation lanes if these bypass sends are being used, but they're just automated. And so there's an extra thing you have to think about that pulls you out of the creative purpose, the creative mindset, and pulls you away from what you're trying to do. It adds a bunch of mouse clicks because now you got to go look at automation lanes, right? Like if you can avoid that, why not? Why not, right? So go make them inactive. And then when you want them on, turn them on. When you want them off, turn them off, right? It's the same. And then if you see one on that's in bypass, maybe there's not automation. Maybe it's not being used. Maybe sometimes I bypass something to check if I like something better. And I'll be like, oh yeah, you know what? I like the guitar solo better without the extra delay. And I bypass it. And then I'll come later and be like, oh shit, is there automation on that? And I'll go look and there isn't. But that's like 1 in 100. Whereas this, if you use this scenario, that's every time. Okay. I'm going to give you another little insight into my send philosophies. Okay. Remember I told you at the very beginning for people who just joined, I said you should spend a good chunk of time allocated to preferences. In Pro Tools, there's a preference that says sends default to. It used to be INF, which meant like infinity, right? And that would be all the way down. And I think it defaulted to that actually. Here's a problem with that, okay? Let's get out of this for a second. We're going to use our singer again, okay? If I defaulted my send to INF, which is 0, singer says, hey, I'd like some reverb. Okay, I already got my send set up. Awesome, right? Cool. One button click, it's on. No, it's not. Now I got to open that up, and I got to go and turn that up. Okay? Chances are, you're probably going to have to adjust this anyways, regardless if it's turned on or off. But I would much rather, when I turn this on, I want to hear it do something right away. I don't want to have to go and be like, oh, why am I not hearing reverb? Oh, I got to go, whatever, right? And then if you find yourself, and this is something I've actually started to do a little bit. This is actually a relatively new preference. I think maybe like a couple versions ago, maybe. I could be wrong on that. But I'm going to start go back in sessions and be like, hey, what are my sends usually set? Are they set like -8, -12? Obviously, it's different for everything, but there's going to be a kind of a consensus. And if that consensus is like -12, I'm going to set this to -12 and have all of my sends just start at -12. Just saves me a step, right? Send pans default to follow main pan. I like that. If in a stereo send, I want this to follow that. And if I don't want that, I can turn it off. But under most circumstances, I do want it to follow. So again, I'm going to set it up the way that I'm going to want the majority of the time. Okay. So I've got my sends. All of them are on because I liked it at 0. I want to hear what that effect is doing the minute I turn it on. Just making sure these are all in my default values because this is going to be my template track. Okay, I'm going to go turn all of these off. Boom, 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 boom. Boom, 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 boom. Okay. And now we're going to set up the returns for this, okay? So now we've got 2 stereo returns and 6 mono returns, okay? Those are there. I'm going to set the inputs. There's some crazy claw quick keys to do this. Why didn't it do it? Oh, I think I did the wrong amount. Come on, see? Juggling act here. Sorry, guys. Okay, let's do this. Let's get rid of those. All right, so here's my sends. I'm going to do my consecutive input, batch input selection here. I'm holding some shift, command, option, and clicking. And because some tracks are stereo and some tracks are mono, it kind of does the proper sends accordingly. Auxiliary returns default to solo safe. And if you don't know what solo safe is, Command S. That's one of those buttons that people call me and are like, hey, I can't hear my reverb. And they're soloing their vocal and they can't hear the reverb. And it's somehow this accidentally gets pressed a lot. So be familiar with that one. Okay. So now we're just going to go through and name these. So I like these to line up with the name of my my sends. So I'm just going to duplicate basically the name of the input. Oh, come on, there we go. Effects 2, effects 3, effects 4. We're going to skip over 5 because 5 is a stereo. That's going to be 6, effects 7, effects 8. Okay, and then I'm going to move the 5 to where it's supposed to go. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Oh, I missed one. Oh, 8. All right. Okay. Effects 8. Oh, see? Look what happens. All right. Okay, so that's my returns. Now, all of these are already set up to feed these, ready to go. So now what you got to do is you just go through and find what works best for your workflow. And for me, I use effects stereo 1 is usually some sort of like realistic reverb that I can use on instruments. Something that sounds like it would be in like a space, a studio or something like that. One of the ones that I do like quite a bit is the Seventh Heaven one. And I'll set this up to either like a studio or a room or a short hall or something of that nature. Okay. So let's just go to rooms, studio A. Fine. Good enough for now. Okay. Effects stereo 5, I usually like that to be my main vocal reverb, which could be anything from like a lexicon plate to I really like the UA capital chambers. Deverb, the stock setting in Deverb, I think has ended up on a shit ton of mixes. Like, I don't want to say accidentally, but we'll start with that when we're tracking, and it just sounds good. And we never bothered changing it. But pick whatever you like, right? I'll pick a 480. I'll go a 480 plate. Really like the relab stuff. Again, don't copy this down. Don't like this. You pick whatever you want. Okay. Boom. Done. Okay. 6, 7, and 8, I always use for delays, and they're usually incrementally longer delays. Okay. My delay of choice for years has been Echo Boy. Let's load these up. I'll put an Echo Boy on every single track. Go through, make sure the mix is up. We'll call this one, we'll do this like a 16th, kind of a slap kind of thing. Maybe change this. Let's go Echoplex. Fine. Mix all the way up. This is going to be an 8th. We have a little bit more feedback. Maybe that's more of like a space echo. Yeah. Okay. And then we'll go a quarter note with a little bit more feedback. And this is going to be more of like a digital delay, kind of true to form for vocal throws. Okay. That's it. Cool. Effects 2 is usually kind of my drum, my kind of 80s gated drum thing. A lot of the guys back in the day used the AMS non-lin. Believe it or not, one of my favorite reverbs for this is actually Deverb. So we'll put Deverb on. I crank that all the way up because I like that. I turn it to the non-lin setting, and I like it the large setting, and done. That one's ready to go. 4, I usually use that as some sort of like not harmonizer spread, but some sort of like chorus spread. Again, I really like the micro shift. Oops, spell that properly here. Micro shift. Okay, and for now, we'll just put it on whatever setting, doesn't matter, because we're going to come right now. We're not worried about what these sound like, right? That's a different process. Okay. And I'll explain that a little bit. And then 3 is kind of my floater. So if I'm doing a song, and I usually, I might even just leave that empty in my templates. So it forces me to pick something based off the song. So if I get a mix to do and it's like metal, I might use this as like a distortion bus where I can feed distortion into it. Somebody asked, the plugin that you use, they can be available and compatible with Studio One. I'm assuming so. I don't know too many. Oh, I mean, Deverb's not. Deverb's a Avid plugin, but I think Studio One, do they use VST? I'm not sure, but most of the plugin developers are doing plugins for everything. So, but again, everything's got free trials. Try stuff out. Pick what you like. If you've noticed, I've got 1 billion plugins and I hate it. I don't use all these. I don't at all. Like, Echo Boy's been around for like 20 years. Like, I really don't use that many plugins. The reason I have them is because I get mixes from a lot of other people, and people load up their sessions, and I'll show you again. I'm going to pop open another session in a bit where I'm going to show you like kind of what I get from people and how to, because the next live stream I do is going to be kind of like, how do we format somebody else's session for our template? But I need all these plugins so that way when people send me stuff, they show up. I don't use 99% of them. If you're just working them by yourself, you don't need a ton of plugins. Just try some stuff out, figure out what works best for you. But anyways, so FX3 is kind of my utility. If I need an extra reverb, it's like I need a spring reverb for an effect. If I'm doing a country thing and I just need a kind of a different kind of really like kind of ambient reverb for some of like the pedal steel or strings or something like that, that's where that reverb will go. But that I will leave empty, and then I will pick it song specific. But right now, and I didn't even really play with these settings, but right now, if we imported this into a session and a singer asked for reverb, we'd have a vocal reverb for them. If the singer wanted a slapback delay, we'd have a slapback delay. Boom. It's effect 6. I know 6, 7, and 8 are my delays. So they're like, yeah, can you give me just like a kind of a medium delay? 7's going to be in between. No, that's too short. Can you give me one longer? Boom. There it is. Like, this is fast. This is so fast. Okay, now turn off the reverb. Well, the reverb's not on right now, but turn off the reverb. Done. Can you give me a like kind of like a harmonizer's pitch spread in my ears? Done. Right? It's just so fast. And then when you're mixing, forget about a singer asking you. When you have the idea, I would really like some slapback on the vocal. It's not okay, now I got to like set up the send, and now which plugin am I going to use? It's all that decision making. You got to get rid of that. All of that needs to happen instantaneously while you're working. And the only way to do that is to think about your process so that way you can set up your template the way that's going to work best for your system or your way of working. Okay. So the next thing I want to show you really quickly, and then I want to get into some Q&A. I know we haven't gotten too far into this. Like I said, I'm going to be doing these regularly. So we might just pick up where we left off on this. I'm going to set up the mix bus really quickly so you can see how I do that. So my kind of like my master section, and then I'm going to show you what to do with these 2 tracks here, these kind of 2 template tracks. Okay, so I like to use a stereo auxiliary for my mix bus, and I'm going to label this. I'll just label this mix bus ST for now. That's mix bus stereo. I like to have a stereo track for my mix print, and we'll call this mix print for now. I shorten this stuff down, but the reason I'm doing this is for you guys. And then like I said, I like to have a track that is my reference, which I'll call ref. Okay. And that's kind of a good start. If you want to have 2 refs, and I sometimes do, sometimes I'll have a track that I refer to as AB, and then I'll have another audio track that is referred to as, let's say, demo or rough mix. I'll just call it rough. So that way I can have the rough mix lined up, and I can always switch between it here. Like, oh, where do they have that vocal delay? Oh, they have a throw there. I need to replicate that, or, whatever, right? Sometimes the rough mixes I get from people are so awesome. It's like sometimes I have to check them once in a while to make sure I'm actually beating it, because people are doing really amazing work these days. So I'm going to recolor my mix bus. Let's just make it red. Clips and tracks. Let's make it red just to make it stand out a little bit. And then these ones I like to make yellow. Actually, you know what? I think I usually do my mix print red too. See, I don't even think about this anymore because it's so second nature, but let's make that red too. Okay. We're going to route all of our track outputs and our effects outputs to our mix bus, because right now they're just going straight to the speakers. So I'm going to go right into, and I've already got this mix bus stereo set up. I'm not going to do the ABC buses right now. Let's just go straight to stereo. So we're going to route all of this to the stereo. So now any signal going through any of these tracks is going to show up right here. Okay. I got to set that input first. Mix bus stereo. Okay. So now anything going to the mix bus is going to be coming out my main output. But now I also need to get that into my mix print track. So when I'm ready to print a mix. So how do we do that? You can set up a send. Sure. Got to make sure that introduces chances for error. Okay. Send gets turned off. Send goes to pre-fader, and you've got automation. The level gets changed. Like it's just that's another thing in my philosophy. I always try to do whatever is going to if the result of, let's say there's 3 ways to do something. Okay, A, B, and C. They all get you to the same endpoint. If there is one that either has the less amount of steps or has less chance of something going wrong or something accidentally getting turned on or off or whatever, I will pick that as the option. I'm trying to avoid all those mistakes so I don't have to go and hunt down what problems are. So what I've found to work the best for this particular scenario, and I know a lot of people who don't even know this about Pro Tools, is you can have your output sending to multiple places at the same time. And I forget what the quick key is. I think it's control. But I've got a bus set up for mix print. Yep, it's control. So now you see that checkbox there. And now if I click outside of this, you'll see a little plus. I don't know if you can see that, but there's a little plus. That means that that track is being output to more than one place. And if you go into the menus, you'll see it has a little check mark next to main out, and it has a little check mark next to mix print. So whatever is going out my speakers is also going to the mix print track, but I got to set my input on the mix print track as well. Mix print. And then, like I said, I've also got an output called mix out on my monitor controller. So I can switch between hearing the mix bus and the mix print. And some people will say, well, isn't that the same thing? Well, once we get down the road, I like to put a limiter, some sort of limiter. Let's just call it an L2 for now. I like to put an L2 or some sort of limiter on my mix print track. It's not going to get printed. This is just monitoring. But the reason I like to do this is I can quickly, once I've printed a mix, or there is a way that I can actually monitor this when it's on input, but because I'm on a HDX system, it's a little bit of a fuck around, but for most people, it won't be an issue. I'll be able to monitor my mix the way I'm hearing it, and then I can do kind of like some pseudo mastering and really quickly hear it. Like, what is this going to sound like when it gets mastered and kind of gets squashed down? Like, is the snare getting demolished? And if so, one of two things will happen. That'll either tell me I need to keep working on my snare balance a little bit, like something's out of whack because it's getting really, really, really crushed by the limiter, or it means that I need to work this in to my mix bus, and then I might just drag that onto my mix bus and then start mixing into it. It just depends. But ultimately, I want to be able to hear my mix print in kind of like a pseudo mastered state. And so that's why I have that going to a separate output, and I can switch back and forth. The AB and the rough, I never need an input on that, so I set it to no input, and I also record safe those tracks by command clicking, and that way if you put everything into record, that won't go into record, and I also won't get the message saying that track doesn't have an input, it can't go to record. And it's like, yeah, no, I never want that to go into record. Those are just imported audio tracks. Any questions about this? Because this is like a really, really basic, easy. We've got a track, we've got our sends, we're routing to a mix bus, we've got our reference tracks, we've got our print track. Like, this is simple, but it's amazing how many people don't actually start with this. It's crazy. Any questions on any of this so far? Like I said, I got a little bit of a delay here, so it might take a second for me to kind of get back to you, but ask questions if you've got them. So here's the next thing. you say, okay, well now I got a track, I got a mono track and I got a stereo track. And if I'm going to be mixing a song, obviously you're going to have more than 2 tracks. These aren't to be used for anything other than creating new tracks, okay? I very rarely, when I need a new track, I very rarely create a new track. Why? Well, because this track, I got to do everything all over again, okay? Now, there is track presets, and I do have track presets that I use, but even still, making a new track and then selecting a track preset, button presses, menus, sub-menus, all that crap. I do have a button on my Stream Deck that makes that super easy. Great. The other thing is when you make a new track, you can select that track preset in here. And if you've been following along, you know I hate drop-down menus. I hate sub-menus. I hate them. I hate them. So here's how I make a new track. I have these template tracks that I never use for anything except for what I'm about to do. If I need let's say somebody gives me a drum kit or they give me audio files, okay? Let's say drum kit. I got a kick, a snare, let's say 2 kicks, 2 snares, 2 toms, hi-hat, ride, so 8 mono, an overhead, stereo room. Let's just leave it at that, okay? So I need 8 mono tracks and 2 stereo tracks for my drums, okay? Again, not to beat a dead horse, but here's the first way of doing it. 8 mono tracks, 2 stereo tracks, okay? Those are my drums, right? And now I got to go set all this crap up, okay? No bueno. No good, okay? Here's what we're going to do. Let me get rid of these. I go to my little template track here, my mono. I needed 8 monos. We're going to go to duplicate track, okay? Duplicate is Option Shift D. Okay, so let's count button clicks, mouse clicks. 1. And if I only needed 1, I could hit enter. I need 8. And the reason why I'm doing 8 instead of 7 is I want to leave this one intact. I always want to have this available to do this with later. Okay. 3. So that was 3 clicks. And now I've got my 8 mono tracks for my drums. The outputs are set. The sends are set. And when we get further down the road, there's going to be even more stuff that's already going to be preset up for us. Grouping, channel strip plugins, track colors. All of this stuff is already set up to go. If you've done it on one, it does it across the others as well. So now we needed 2 stereo. Duplicate. Okay. Now just reorder these because I don't want to touch those 2 at the top. We're going to leave those alone. And now here I've got kick, snare. Oh, I said I had two kicks, right? Kick in, let's say K in, K out, S top, S bot, tom high, T low, hats, ride, overhead, room, boom. There's my drums. Sends are already set up. Routing to the bus is already ready to go. Like, that was fast, right? So this is like a super time saver. Use duplicate tracks. If you've got it, just leave these like kind of template tracks in your session. Don't ever use them for anything. Just duplicate them. Duplicate off of them. You should never be creating a new track. If you just need an audio track, it should always be duplicated from something. Okay. Somebody asked a question in the chat. No questions. Great seeing your thought process. Awesome. Thank you. Hey, John, how's it going, buddy? John Plett asked, do you always import references tracks onto a channel versus something like the adapter AB? Interesting you asked that. So something I've actually been doing lately is I said sometimes I've only got one ref out. Oh, I forgot to set these. That's the other thing. Once you do these once, you're probably going to catch your mistakes, and then you'll never have to make those mistakes ever again. Okay, so I've only got one reference out. So I usually, that the A/B track and the rough mix track shares the ref out. So what I've actually been doing recently is we'll get rid of the rough track. My A/B track, I will put the demo or the rough mix on the A/B track, right? And then I'll use exactly what you said. I'll use the adapter A/B plugin. Oh, this is always set up, so I usually don't have to do these goddamn menus. Boom. Okay. This is an awesome plugin. If anybody doesn't have it, this is one I highly recommend for a variety of reasons. But the A/B function alone is awesome. I know other plugins do the A/B, but the metering on this is really great. And also something I don't do this a ton, but it can be helpful if you're really having problems. You can filter the audio. So if you're using a reference track, let's say you're like, man, I really love the low end of that, Randy Staub mix. You can just listen to the low end of that Randy Staub mix, and then just listen to the low end of your mix. So you have to figure out, you guys have to figure out if this A/B plugin works better on your reference track, or if it works better on your mix print track, or if it works better on your mix stereo track. I know a lot of people who put it on their mix bus. When I first got this plugin, I put it on my mix print track. So that way I could monitor through my mix print track and hear my mix and use those filters. And sometimes I'll do that, but I don't do that enough to make it worth it. So, yes, that is actually exactly what you suggested there, John, is what's in my current mix template. And then I'll just put the rough mix or the demo mix on that A/B track. So I'll just have one reference track, and then I'll load this up with a bunch of awesome stuff. So, all right, cool. Let me see if there's any other questions. Okay, I think we're up to date on questions. Okay, I'm gonna hold off there for a second. I want to show you guys some tracks, some sessions that I get. I don't mean to laugh. Something I didn't explain at the beginning of this. What are the reasons why I wanted to do this? And when I say do this, do the live streams. I love live streams. I love live streams. This is my first live stream. I don't know if I love live streams. We'll see. I love talking shop. I love sharing. I love teaching. I wouldn't call it teaching, but I like this process. The only thing that would be better for me right now is how many people we got on this? We got 30 people on the call right now. I would love to be in a room with all 30 of you. That's the only thing that would make this better. And I'm actually talking with a few different companies to potentially make that happen. But anyways, virtually, of course. I really feel compelled, and not in a righteous way, but I take a lot of pride in having like a really high bar and having a high expectation for myself, and I feel very compelled to share stuff like this to kind of just help raise the bar for everybody and help everybody just either work smarter or faster. And if you can work smarter or faster, then ultimately your work's going to be better because you can we've got limited bandwidth. Our brain can only concentrate so much. We can only be multitasking so much. I don't want producers and engineers and musicians to be eating up half of their creativity with all the bullshit technical stuff. But I also don't want that to be a reason that people don't do things like naming tracks. Like the only reason for not naming a track is because you're like, well, I'm in the middle of a creative flow. I don't want to name it. I get that. So let's figure out a way, instead of just being like, fuck it, I'm not going to name it. And that's my excuse because I don't want to come out of the creative mode. Great. Cool. Well, when you're not being creative, when you're in these modes of thinking about how do I improve my workflow, that shouldn't be happening while you're writing a song. That should be happening like, while you're eating breakfast or having a coffee or after you've shut down for the day, being like, hey, what was a roadblock for me today? What was something that I could, like, is there a way I could have like made that process a little smoother, and jot down notes, right? And then figure out times where you just devote to like playing around with stuff to work on your workflow. But anyways, I'm going back. I'm going to show you a couple sessions of examples of sessions that I get from people to just give you an idea of kind of real world stuff. And because we're going to have to interact with that. And I'm just going to, I don't want to nitpick, but I'm going to nitpick. Okay. I'm going to close this down. I recently had a mix sent to me, and they sent me a very clean Pro Tool session. And it was basically audio files. They had basically converted all of their, or committed most of their plugins. There was a couple plugins that they didn't, that could easily be replicated by myself. And anywhere where they wanted to leave me some options, they just gave me some options, but they made it very clean and clear. And I just want to give you an example of maybe kind of like what a clean deliverable would look like. So this is a pretty clean session. Drum tracks are consolidated from top to bottom. I'm not one of those people who needs all the tracks consolidated top to bottom, depending on what it is. If it's drum tracks, yeah. If the thing plays top to bottom, like play top to bottom, but like these percussion tracks down here, I've gone through and cleaned up a few things in this. I've grouped it the way I like it grouped. I've named it the way I like it named. But for the most part, this is kind of how it showed up to me. They've gave me a rough mix. I've got it down here at the bottom. I haven't imported any of my template here. I haven't done any routing except for I'm using some folder tracks. So they multi-mic'd guitars. And they didn't combine the mics. So an easy way, here's another little trick, especially for if you are a producer or a musician or engineer. If you're going to keep your guitar mic separate, use folder tracks. So here I've got 5 tracks. It's all the same performance. This is just different mics, different cabinets, different mics, whatever. Just route that to a folder track. And then you can have, and then I can just treat this like, that's that one guitar track. But this is a good example of something that's kind of relatively clean, right? This is what we should be aiming for when you're finished a production and you're like, yeah, I'm ready to hand this off to somebody to mix. Now, there's no plugins in this. If there were a bunch of plugins in this, that would be okay too. But don't leave plugins like drum sample, like triggers, or guitar amp simulators, or like, distortion plugins, or like effect things that if you take those off, the thing doesn't sound the same anymore. Print those. And if you're unsure, print one, leave the unaffected one, and then label them clean names. Short names that make sense, and just put one, with effects, or dry, one wet, however you want to label it, just make it obvious, right? So there's a good example of kind of like, yeah, pretty clean. Let's open up the other end of the spectrum. And again, I'm not trying to like insult anybody or kick or rub salt in wounds, but this is simply just reality. And the funny thing is, some of the most talented, some of the some of the producers that you hear their songs on the radio, a lot of them, their sessions are kind of disasters. And I often think, I'm like, man, it obviously doesn't bother them, but imagine if they could do that while having to deal with this kind of mess. Like, imagine what they could do. Imagine how good their sessions would be or how good their output, their creative flow would be if everything just kind of fell into place and everything was set up in a certain way, and it just, the workflow helped enable, as opposed to was just kind of like a disaster. So anyways, here's kind of the opposite scenario where, I've got tracks made inactive. I don't know what I'm supposed to be using. I've got playlists. I've got edits all over the place. The markers are like, there's way too many markers. I can't read any. This again, this is overwhelming for me to look at, and yeah, this is overwhelming. This is not that far from the norm, believe it or not. I don't want this to be the norm. This is the norm right now, and it shouldn't be. We need to do better. So, somebody said, my heart sank looking at this session. I like I said, we got a little bit of a delay. I'm wondering if you're looking at the clean session, your heart sank thinking that's what your session should look like, or if you're looking at this session that I got up now, which is a not quite so clean. But anyways, we don't have to nitpick that one apart for now. I want to get into a little bit of Q&A here. I'm going to get into a little bit of Q&A, and then, yeah, and we'll wrap it up for tonight. So I'll close that up. If you've got questions, start firing off, because by the time I get this session back open, I'll probably be at them. So let me look back in here. The second unclean session. How often do you look at track comments if sent in the Pro Tool sessions? Okay, so interesting thing. I do look at them. I would say writing comments in the tracks, that's almost like we need to have a whole video on that. Sometimes people type like insane paragraphs of stuff. If there's something on that track that needs like a paragraph of explanation, you shouldn't be delivering it. It's not ready to send. So if it's like, oh, I've included 18 playlists for you to decide which guitar solo you like the best, and I've also I gave you a DI on the last track, and then most of the time the DI actually, the edits don't line up, and obviously worst case scenario, but it should be something very simple, like printed with, I don't know, pick a plugin, printed with Fab Filter, Saturn. For the like that, it should just be as simple as that. Printed with dry track on playlist 2. So if you want the one without Saturn, I go to playlist 2, and there's the print without Saturn. Like that's what the comment should say. If the comment is more than a few words, and it needs, like, that track needs a big explanation, it's not ready to send. It's just you haven't finished either cleaning up the session or doing your job as a producer. So yeah. Going back in the comments here, they recently updated some features in it that makes it even better. Oh, the AB plugin. I should check that out. Hey, Chris, let's say you're producing a song. Do you mix as you go? If not, how do you transition into the mixing process? Great question. If I'm producing a song, the short answer is yes, I'm mixing as I go, but I'm not thinking of final mix stuff. All I'm thinking at that point is about enabling the creative flow. So, for instance, I'm not EQing something because I'm like, oh, this is what works better in the mix, or this is going to be, what I'm going to end up doing because I do that to 9 out of 10 whatevers. I'm doing it because I want it to sound good, so the band's excited, or so the singer is hearing a good headphone mix when he's singing and it sounds as finished as possible. But none of that stuff I'm precious with. I will, number one, like I said, I deverb pops up. I think actually, if anybody watched the URM Nail the Mix, and I think when I opened that session, it was a little bit of a surprise. I think the lead vocal reverb was deverb. And the reason why was because that's what we use during tracking, because there's a DSP equivalent for the HDX systems. And you can run it real time, no latency, it's all good to go. So I use that when I track. And then if I'm mixing, once we get kind of past that vocal tracking session, kind of part of the production, then I'll switch it out to something I like better, or something that fits a song more, whatever. I'm not precious with any of that stuff. So if it sounds good, I'll leave it. And that's my starting point when we go to mix. But I'm not thinking consciously about I'm mixing this track right now and I need to do X, Y, and Z because of the mix. I'm just making it sound good so we can work. And so that way we're hearing things in context, like, guitar solo, for instance. Like, was that guitar solo any good? Well, I don't know. It's buried in the mix. I can't hear it. Or it's way too loud. And it's like, the sound is just so gimmicky that you're like, oh my God, everything sounds good. And then when you kind of listen back in context and you tuck it in, you're like, I don't know if that part's that good. I think the solo can be better. So the mix, I'm always mixing while I'm going. How I transition into, I could do a whole video on this. You know what? I'm going to write that down. I could do a whole video on doing that transition, because I do the same thing whether I'm sending the mix to Chris Lord Algae to mix, whether I'm doing the mix myself, whatever it is, or if the mix is almost done and it's just like, it just kind of organically evolved. I will go through and do exactly what I just told you guys to do. Any of those plugins that are like, okay, that's a guitar amp simulator, that's not going to change. That's part of the sound. Print it. Any sort of like delay throws that are like, yeah, that's built. That's the way I want it. I don't want to have to have the mixer recreate that. Even if I'm the mixer, I'll print that. So it just gives me more control over it. I'll clean up the session. I'll go through, even as meticulous as I am when I'm producing, the track names get jacked up. Like I said, I use duplicate. That's my quick key to make a new track. Well, I end up with a lot of tracks that have, it will say like, G RHY guitar rhythm .dupe 5. And I try to change it before I start recording on it, but it just happens where it's like you're flying. Somebody's like, give me another track, give me another track, give me another track. And then you're flying. And then, so I'll go up and clean up all that stuff. So for the people who like don't name their tracks, they're like, oh, well, I was in the moment. And it's like, oh, were you in the moment at like the next day when you're opening it up to listen to what you did the night before? While you're listening, name the fucking tracks. It's easy. Just go through the session, either at the beginning of every day or at the end of every day. Get in the habit of just cleaning up your session, even if you're in the middle of it. So I hope I answered that question. How do you look at, I already did that comment section. Messy kicks up. Oh yes. Messy makes my anxiety go through the roof. It's funny. Back in the day when I worked at like commercial studios or studios that had lots of outboard gear, the patch bay can look like a rat's nest very fast. And I used to do the same thing with the patch bay. Like I would color code cables. I would be like, oh, red ones are for this. Or if it was a stereo pair, I would use a red and a black for the left and the right. So I knew, so that way when I was doing recalls, I could quickly, like I had a method. And it's amazing how many people would come in and they'd be like, man, there's like 1,000 cables in that thing, but that's like the cleanest patch bay I've ever seen, because everything was kind of had thought behind it and had purpose. And it was done in such a way where I'm like, in the middle of a session, if something goes wrong, it's going to be a lot easier for me to find that problem in that patch bay if the patch bay is organized in a kind of a somewhat methodical way. If it's just a fucking mess, you're screwed. Same with the session. If you're working in the session, you're like, oh, I got to write a guitar part. And you're like, oh man, I got to turn that keyboard part off. I don't want that keyboard. Where the hell is that keyboard? It's like, if you don't have your keyboards in the same spot in every session, like it's crazy. So yes, messy, I don't like working anything messy. I know some guys who love studios messy, and I'm sure they love their sessions messy too. I sometimes think that's a cop out for actually just not cleaning up your shit. Messy, would you ever look at playlists if not mentioned in a comment? Yes, so I do. But I hate when people send me playlists that okay, so here's a perfect example, okay? So let's say, here's a good example. Okay, so here's my room mic. Okay, I'm gonna duplicate this playlist. Let's pretend there's something on this track, and let's pretend there's something on this track, okay? Now I can tell there's alternate playlists because that little arrow here lights up blue, right? So I know there's a playlist. If there's no comment telling me there's something else in the playlist, That's not that big of a deal. I don't need a comment saying check the other playlist unless it needs a little bit of an explanation. But here's the thing. If there's another playlist, the name of this track should not just be rm.01. So maybe this is room effects and I printed it with like a really squashy compressor. Maybe I just crushed the crap out of it. And I'm like, I really like that sound. I'm going to give you that option because I really liked it. And there's a drum breakdown where it's just that room. And I really liked, we got it sounding the way we want. So I'm going to give that printed the way I want it. And then if I switch it, I'm going to instantly know. I'm like, oh, he printed it with an effect. Okay, cool. Right? Now, if it's kind of like I don't know. I can't think of a scenario where like for that, in that circumstance where you'd put a bunch of comments, but maybe, well, actually, you know what? Maybe if you wanted to give me the settings, maybe you're like, I printed that with what's the sound toys? Decapitator. I printed it with Decapitator on the A setting. I like something like that, or leave the plugin deactivated, right? You could do that too. But yes, just make sure. I used to tell assistants this when I used to train assistants, and I haven't for a while. Although I am actually looking now for a new remote assistant. If you haven't sent your resume to my website, email, please do. I used to tell them this. Imagine whatever you're doing, whatever you're prepping, whatever you're editing, whatever, the person that is next in line to get it, you did not get the opportunity to explain anything. Like you weren't there. They just got it and you weren't available. They should have all of the information that they need to fill in all the blanks and to answer any questions they might have. So you got to anticipate, right? So if you're like, oh, hey, when you open up the session, give me a call. I want to explain to you what those alternate playlists are. Well, then you haven't done a good enough job either labeling your tracks or the playlists or putting notes in the comments. So there you go. Can I describe my analog chain and routing? Do you keep it pretty minimal such that recalls are seamless? Keep it to a master bus chain or use the same XYZ buses stems for summing? I'm going to dig into that on another day, another call where we'll talk about like mix bus stuff, and we'll actually start getting into some more like technical stuff, more like sonic stuff, where I can kind of show you some examples of how I use that. But for right now, my hardware is actually pretty streamlined. It is mainly mix bus. I've gotten rid of a lot of gear over the last few years. Anytime I find a plugin that can kind of do what something was doing in the outboard world, and it's within a few percentage points of accuracy, or forget accuracy. I don't even care if it sounds the same. Does it just sound good enough where I'm like, yep, this does what I want it to do? I don't care if it sounds the exact same or not. It just needs to do what I want it to do. Hardware's gone. So I do have some outboard gear still. Mainly on mix bus. The recalls are pretty minimal. Is what it is. Right now my analog chain is, I've got a Kahayan Epsilon 4K mix bus, which is a 16 channel summing amp. It kind of replicates like an SSL 4000. It goes into a Crane Song head converter, and it's got some saturation stuff on it that I love. That is the thing actually that kind of doesn't move. It's kind of just set, and anything that goes through it just sounds more the way I want it to sound. Once that gets in the box, then I have a hardware insert. You know what? I'm going to go to this. Sorry, guys. See, here's my lack of live stream experience. Let me switch the windows. That's better. Mix bus. I've got a hardware insert on my mix bus, and I've got two different chains that I switch between. I've got the SSL Bus Plus, which is their new mix bus. I've got the SSL Fusion, which is kind of their 2-channel thing, and then I've got a separate chain that is the Dangerous Audio Back CQ the Obsidian, the Dramastic Audio Obsidian compressor, and the Overstayer MAS saturator unit. And I'd say the second chain, the one with the Obsidian and the Overstayer, those settings kind of don't move much. The SSL thing is so in depth that changes a lot. So, let me go to this. Hopefully that answers your question. But like I said, I'll do another video where I actually go through and I'll run audio through that, and you guys can hear, and I'll explain to you like why am I using a saturator there? What am I not getting that I'm now getting when I turn it on? So, is part of your recreating your template from time to time also about changing up your sound? Some URM mixers have commented they worry about this. Okay, so yes, and I'm gonna do, actually, you know what? Let's go back to this. Sorry, guys. I'm gonna open up my template. Okay, give me a second here, guys. So in my mix template, the one that I use for pretty much just about everything, I actually don't have any plugins in it. And the reason I do that is exactly what you're suggesting, or what you were inferring. I'm not so worried about things always sounding the same. You know what? Regardless of what plugin I use, it's always going to sound the same. If I'm using a plugin, if I'm using a channel strip that's like a little bit darker than the one I was previously using, well, I'm going to add more top end. I'm going to keep tweaking the way until it is the way that I want to hear it. So same with reverbs. It's like like we all have taste, right? We gravitate towards stuff. I don't use the Deverb non-lin because somebody said it was good. I use it because it fits. It sounds the way I want it to sound. Do I not want every snare drum I record or mix to have that reverb on? Yeah, kind of. Yeah. But the crazy thing is I'll put on an AMS, or I'll put on the Seventh Heaven, or I'll put on a Lexicon 480, and I'll end up with a sound that kind of sounds like the Deverb non-lin because that's kind of what I want it to sound like, right? So, okay, I'm going to go back to here. So this is... sorry, guys, I want to see the chat. Whoop, whoop, whoop. There we go. Okay. This is my template. No plugins. Oh, I lied. There's a few plugins. Those are on some of my bass amp things. So what I will do actually when I'm starting to mix a project, and I have an idea of what it is because somebody sent me a rough mix or something I'm doing or whatever the circumstance is, I typically don't sit down to mix a song and I'm like, oh, what is this? And like, I have an idea of what it is. Once I have an idea of what it is, what I'll do is I'll go and duplicate this mix template for that particular project. So let's say I'm going to mix a Daughtry album. Okay. And so what I'll do is I'll say, okay, I'll hear a couple rough mixes and be like, oh man, the Daughtry stuff, the new Daughtry stuff's it's actually kind of heavy. Like, this is cool. Like, I dig this, but it's going to be a little heavier. And then what I'll do is I'll build out my Daughtry template. I'll base it off of this. So I'll save as Daughtry. And then I'll say, okay, you know what? I'm going to use the SSL channel strip for all of the Waves SSL channel strip, which is the one that I've been using for years. I'm going to use that on all of my drum stuff. Okay. So then I'll go and just put one here. Okay. And now I've got an SSL channel strip. Boom. Okay. And then I'll hear the rough mix and I'll be like, oh, they've got lots of vocal throws. There's lots of vocal effects. The reverbs are big. The vocal's not dry. The guitars have lots of reverb on them. Like, it's a very wet, dense thing, which I love. So then I'll build out my effects returns and I'll say, okay, well, I don't want little short rooms. Like, I want the ambience to be obvious. So it's going to be more like like long plates or halls or chambered reverbs for various things. I'll set up all my effects returns, kind of just guessing where things are going to be. And ultimately, what happens when I do it this way is it just doesn't look like the last thing I did. But at the end of the day, it probably ends up sounding very similar. So hope that helps. Yeah, I think I kind of described that a little bit. I'm not so worried. I'm not worried. Like my sound is my sound. I'm not worried about like, oh, nobody wants my sound anymore. If that happens, then I'm probably just not going to do a lot of mixing. I'll probably just do more producing. Like my sound isn't it's not a contrived thing. It's not a preconceived notion of what it should be. It just sounds the way because I just tweak things until they sound the way that I like them to sound. So, any advice on mixing fully programmed sample drums as opposed to a standard live drum kit? Ways of making the in-the-box drums sound closer to full or real drums? Absolutely. And actually, I've got a plug. I'm gonna plug a product. I've actually got a sample library coming out with DrumForge, a new one that is kind of based around helping that problem. Even though it's samples helping samples. I like that. But it's the thing that I find a lot with that problem is trying to use room mics, try to use like overheads in some of these drum sampler programs. I use Superior Drummer a ton. And I have like the overheads, obviously the cymbals are there, but the overheads will have like this kick drum and the snare drum and bleed coming from a bunch of different things. I'll print a bunch of the room mics in Superior Drummer. I will trigger my own room mic samples to help give it some realism, give it some air, give it some space instead of just like one shots are great. One shots are good for supplementing drum kits in my experience. One shots help give the drum kit the thing that the drum kit doesn't have. But if you're only using one shots, unless they're very organic one shots, typically then it just starts sounding like a drum machine to me. So then you have to basically reverse engineer and say, okay, well, I've got the big hi-fi one shot samples. What don't I have? Well, you don't have all like I don't want to say the leakage, but you don't have like the leakage. You don't have like the organic thing of, the overheads and the room mics and all that stuff having some sort of cohesive nature. And so I would say like try to fake the rooms as much as you can and fake the rooms in such a way where like the kick is in the same room as the snare, is the same room as the toms. And that's why, like I said, I like printing a lot of those like Superior Drummer ambient stuff. So let me go back to this view. Hang on one second, guys. Webcam chat. There we go. Any advice? Yep, got that. Could you do a stream video where you describe how you adapt your workflow to Atmos? Maybe you get the stems out if that's how you work. Okay, Atmos is a whole other can of worms. Atmos is interesting, and it's a little Wild West right now because everybody's got a different way of doing it. I am not currently right now. I'm not set up to do Atmos mixes. If I'm going to do an Atmos mix, I have a couple studios and engineers that I collaborate with, and we team up to do them. They've got great facilities. They've got more experience than me on that platform, but we are still experimenting with kind of best practices to get it. I don't want to say sound better than the stereo mix, but I mean, so many people are hearing Atmos in headphones. So if you're just hearing it through two channels, a lot of the rock stuff that I've either worked on or listened to, the stereo mix just has more of a thing. It's more the way that it was meant to be heard than the spatial stuff. The spatial stuff kind of washes it out a little bit. It kind of makes some of the stuff a little undefined. It changes like the frequency kind of spectrum of a lot of things. Guitars can sometimes get a little phasey. So we're still kind of in its infancy. So I'm probably not going to devote too much time to Atmos stuff in terms of like live streams. But I think one of the things that will become a conversation moving forward, I think for a while, is figuring out how do guys like me prep the stems for Atmos rendering and to mix in Atmos, because that is there's not a consensus on the best way to do that yet. So lots of crazy stuff. When tracking, do you have a preference of using command plus control plus duplicating the play? Oh yeah. I do that. Yeah, control. I don't even know what the duplicating the playlist, or shift option down arrow copying to a new playlist to knock your clips into the playlist and keep the session flowing smoothly. I'm not sure, John, I understand the question. Tracking, do you have a preference of using command to duplicate the playlist, or arrow copying to a new playlist to knock your clips? So when I'm tracking, a lot of the time I'm hitting, I think it's control and the backslash button. A lot of the time I'm just making new playlists. I'll just track, make a new playlist, track, make a new playlist, track, make a new playlist. One of the things that I do, especially with more so with vocals than anything else, but I'll have a track underneath my vocal track, and I call it punch. I name it like punch, and it will be a duplicate of whatever the vocal track is, but with nothing on it. And if somebody wants to hear something they've already done, or if there was something that somebody did that was good, and they're like, oh, that was great, I'll just copy it down to that track, and that way they can hear it rolling into the next take. The thing with the duplicating playlists that I hate is then when you go look at all the playlists, let's say you did 20 takes of the verse, and then you did 10 more takes of the chorus, but they wanted to hear the verse punched in on the chorus, you're going to have 30 playlists of verses. And it's not easily identifiable without, I mean, it is, but it's not as easy to basically know which verse playlists are duplicates or not. So I don't like the duplicate playlist. Maybe that answers your question. Very cool. Video idea. Guitar geek warning. Describe what you think great tones for modern DI recording. Go-to guitars for various situations. Pickups, outputs, scale levels. That's a great idea. I'm going to write that one down. Thank you. Yeah, I'm a shitty guitar player, but I love guitar tone. I love guitar gear. I love guitars. And I use any and all tools available. I'm not precious. As some of you may know, if you don't know, I've got an amp simulator plugin called the CB4, which is an incredibly authentic, accurate software emulation of my Diesel VH4. I've got a Fractal Lax FX3 here that I use a ton. Even some of the biggest Nickelback tones that you guys love is Amp Farm. It's hilarious every time people hear that. Well, it's mixed in, but yeah, I use everything and anything. The thing that I will comment really quickly on this, and this kind of goes to mix prep and maybe just thinking ahead as well. Something I really, really, really want to kind of spread the word about and get people, kind of bedroom producers or artists who are producing their own music, please, when you're sending your production out to a mixer, make a decision on the guitar tone. Don't send me a DI with no guitar amp simulator. You obviously were listening to something when you were tracking it. Maybe it's not great. Maybe it was. You probably tweaked it until where you were happy, at least happy enough to keep producing the song. Give me that, or give the mixer that. You can include the DI, turn the DI off, send them a note. Like I said, put in the comments, put it on a playlist, whatever. Make it obvious. Make sure the edits stay the same. So if I reamp it, it's gonna have the same edits and everything. But make a decision. At least give some indication, right? So if you're tracking through a rectifier and you're like, hey, I'm not completely happy with this, but this is as good as we could get. Yeah, maybe I'll try to go a little further with it. But if you give me nothing, I'm just going to be like shooting like in the dark, being like, well, now I'm producing. Now I'm making production decisions. So if you're the producer, make some decisions. That's what you're doing. So, but yes, I will do a guitar video because, or a guitar live stream, because I think that's a really cool one. And I'll pull up some plugins. I'll plug in some guitars. I'll line up some stuff. We can hear some stuff live and kind of talk about it while I'm doing it. So, do you like using tools like Keyboard Maestro and SoundFlow? 100%. Samuel, I mentioned that actually really early on. Not sure if you were on yet, but I said, yeah, I'm a huge advocate of SoundFlow. Keyboard Maestro was what I used before SoundFlow. There was a program called Quick Keys that I used before Keyboard Maestro. 100%. Absolutely. And it's funny, not funny. It's a good exercise to, let's say I'm going to give you guys all a challenge. Okay. Today's Friday night, Saturday, for some of you in different time zones. I'm going to give you a challenge. By this time next weekend, I want you guys to write down, just write them down. 20, well, let's keep it easy. 10, either processes, which would be like multiple keystrokes, multiple things that you do every time that you could. If you had one button to take care of that all, you would do it. Or one button, a quick key that would just access one thing, but that's like buried deep in a menu. And just write down 10 of them that you're like, man, if I had a key that I could press to access that thing or to do that thing, that would make my life so much easier. Don't be sitting in front of your rig. Don't be middle of working, mixing a song, just like while you're having breakfast or having coffee or having a glass of wine at night, whatever. Write it down. I've got a list. I constantly have a list of macros that I need to program into SoundFlow. And then when I have time between sessions, or if I'm waiting on mix revisions or something like that, I go in and I knock out a couple of them. By the time I knock them all out, I've got another 30 of them, and they're never ending. I've been doing this for 20 years, more than 20 years, and I'm still figuring out quick keys I should program, macros I should program. Like, it's crazy. It's never ending. It's never ending. So yes, absolutely. I'll do a few more, and then I think I'm going to wrap this sucker up. Oh man, that's 2 hours flies when we're having fun. Oh, by the way, if anybody has some really good experience with these live streaming situations, let me know if there's a way. I think there's a lower latency mode that we can do that this is a little bit more real time. But let me know if anybody has any suggestions for how we can make this chat a little bit more interactive, because I think you guys are a little bit behind me. Anyways, do I like using tools? Yep. When you're sent a song to mix, do you rename their tracks to fit with your template versus leaving the track name? Awesome question. This is a great question. The reason why this question is so good is because I don't have an answer. I don't have a short answer, but I will explain my thought process. And sometimes I rename the track name, sometimes I don't. Here's why. Pros and cons. Renaming track names. Pros, cleans up the session. It's exactly the way I want to see it. Makes just my life so much easier. And I would prefer to have the tracks named the way they fit into my template. If I want to import from another song that I'm like, oh, I know I have got like a chain on that track that's really great, I can do a match track instead of having to import it and drag plugins over. There's a lot of just like clean, neat. Yeah, I'm a neat freak, as you guys have known by now. I prefer to rename the tracks the way that I want them. Yes. Here's the detriment to that. And unfortunately, the reality that we live in as mixers these days, and I wish it wasn't, but you know, I'm guilty of this too when I have other people mix my productions. There's so many times when you'll prep a track, you'll send it out, and then either I'll come up with an idea like, oh shit, we should have done this, and you'll have to go in and edit something, or you'll have to go in and recut something, or you'll have to, you go in and let's say something's not sounding the way you want. You're like, listen, I'm going to go into my session, I'm going to build a plugin chain, and I'll send it to you, put it in. If I go and change all of your names, and then I have to then, let's say the arrangement changed, and it changed so much to where having to bring all your audio in and drop it on my tracks, or having me to then recreate those arrangement changes, is a pain in the ass. And those situations do exist. It's not just like, oh, take out the second pre-chorus. Like, there's sometimes where it's like, okay, we're going to fly like this part to this part, but this part goes to this part. And it's like, it's one of these things where some tracks are getting copied. Like, it's a disaster. If I don't change their track names, it's really easy for me to do a match tracks on the import session window. And to where I can just bring in the audio and, let's say, automation or something like that, depending on what we're doing. So there are some producers I work with, I don't change their track names, because I know there's a high probability of something in the production changing enough to where I'm going to need to re-import the entire session, or a good chunk of it. And I don't want to have, it's just going to be too much of a juggling act trying to match stuff up. So ideally, what I would really like to do, and this is something I've been thinking about, but it's not as easy, because again, it's like, getting people to change their ways is difficult, and I have my way. And if somebody tried to get me to change my way, I'd probably fight kicking and screaming. But what I would like to do is, and I think if you are collaborating with artists or producers that are constantly sending you stuff to mix, figure out a system with them. And maybe that system is being like, hey, before you send me the track to mix, can I spend a half hour cleaning up your session and then give it back to you before you finish all your like prep stuff? And maybe that's just a quick cleanup. And maybe all that is changing the track names to something that makes sense to both of you. And that way, when you get it, you're not going to need to change everything, but also you're not going to be looking at something you hate. And if they change something in their session after you've already gone to work and you need to import it, the match tracks will be seamless. So that's my goal, is to get to a point where the producers that I do mix for, the artists I mix for, I can kind of get their naming scheme a little bit more in line. I can get their session organization a little more in line. Maybe not while they're working, but at least like at the very end. So something to think about. Want to see Atmos. Yeah, the Atmos conversation is very interesting. Very interesting. Samuel Ampsim is incredible. Thank you. Appreciate that. Awesome. Well, guys, I think this might be a good place to wrap. I feel like a lot of this was like elementary, like Pro Tools 101 stuff, but I hope, and sometimes that stuff's good to revisit. But I hope you got more than just kind of, this is how you do this. A little bit more insight as to how to make these decisions, how to, the questions to ask yourself when you're setting things up, and to just think about why you would do certain things a certain way and not another way, or what are the pros and cons. Give yourself 3 options of a way to do something, like naming tracks. Do you use capitals? Do you not use capitals? Pro and con. There's pros and cons. Figure them out for yourself, and then systemize it. Do it every time. Do you abbreviate stuff? If you do, what's your abbreviation? Do you like it to phonetically look the way it sounds? Do you just like to drop vowels? Do you like to have the first 3 or 4 letters of whatever it is spelt the way it would be? What works best for you? Pros and cons, and then pick the one that you like the best. So, this is awesome. Like I said, I know some of you guys jumped on after the fact. If you didn't hear my kind of initial intro, this is something that I've wanted to do for a long time. And honestly, it's like I've procrastinated because it's kind of scary putting yourself out there. And I'm glad we've had a really good participation here. That's been very motivating for me. That's very encouraging for me. I appreciate you guys hanging through this. And it's just inspired me to want to do this more often and dig in deeper and do a variety of stuff. So what I would like, if I could ask you guys something, please, obviously subscribe to the channel, follow me on Instagram, Chris Baseford, share this with your friends, anybody who you think would like this, and DM me topic suggestions or down in the comments. And yeah, let's keep this going. My goal is to do this often, at least a few times a month, if not more, and get it to a point where this becomes even a little bit more of a collaborative community. And yeah, just share a little bit more of less about the 5 secrets to an awesome mix. Those don't exist. They don't. I want to help you guys catch fish instead of. I want to teach you to fish instead of just giving you fish, if that makes sense. So thank you guys so much, and yeah, keep an eye out. I'll schedule the next one as soon as I can. So thank you guys. We'll see you on the next one.